and ask questions. Thank you very much, Michelle, for starting the recording. As a lot of you probably know, today is the first day of the 2020 Wisconsin Lakes and Rivers online learning event. I'm Erin McFarland. I'll be moderating the workshop this afternoon, and we also have Michelle Scarpas with us. She is a natural resource educator in the Rock River Basin. She was kind enough to set this meeting up for us, and she's offering us some technical support, and we really appreciate her help. Now, I think some of you who are joining us for this training have attended the Lakes Convention that we've held in Stevens Point for the past few years before. Believe it or not, we've held a statewide Lakes Convention for over 40 years in Wisconsin. And then this is actually the first time, however, it's been held virtually. So we've learned a lot the past few weeks, and we've really appreciated all of the support we've received from you all of our participants and the presenters. As for everyone right now, the challenges posed during this last bit of time have been difficult, and it's made participating even more difficult for our presenters. We're very fortunate that we have some folks like Erica and Gavin and Michelle who have stuck with us, and so we really want to thank Erica and Gavin and Michelle for joining us and sticking with us while we figure all of this out. I just want to take a minute to orient all of you to Zoom in case this is the first time you've used Zoom or any sort of online meeting. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen you have a black toolbar, and there's a microphone image there. It has a red line across it because it shows you're muted. And we're actually going to ask all of our attendees, except for our presenters today, to stay muted. That'll help eliminate any background noise. You might have dogs, or in my case, children who like to run through the room, and so we'll try to keep that at a minimum so we can all hear Erica and Gavin really clearly during their presentation. You'll also see a video camera sign there with a red line across that. That just shows that your video cam is off, and we're gonna keep those off today too. Sometimes that can affect these meetings if we have a lot of people using their cameras. So we'll keep those off as well. While we all recognize that an in-person event is much more ideal, we luckily can still learn a lot of great information from Erica and Gavin today, and also submit any questions we have to them using a chat box. At the bottom of your screen in that black toolbar, you'll see a talk bubble, and I believe it says chat. If you click that, you'll see a new box pop up, and in that box at the bottom is a place where you can type a message. You can type a message to everyone, and then that way we'll all see your question. If you would like to just send a question directly to myself, Michelle, or Erica, or Gavin, you can do that as well. And then once you type it, you hit enter, and that'll submit your question, and it'll show up in the box. And if you want to test that out, by all means, do so. Erica said it would probably work better for her to answer questions, and Gavin more towards the end of the presentation, but you're welcome to submit questions the whole way through, and we'll see if there's any that aren't answered by the time they're done. Michelle, if I forgot anything, please chime in, and otherwise I'm gonna turn it over to Erica and Gavin and let them introduce themselves further.
Great, thank you, Erin. So my name's Erica Lemoyne, and I've been directing the Loonwatch program for about 9 years. And I just wanted to go over a little bit more information. We are going to be covering a lot of ground today, and so that's why we'd like for you to save your questions until the end, because most likely your question will probably be answered within the presentation. However, if it isn't, we'll answer questions at the end. And because we're covering so much information, I'd like you to take some time to write down our contact information, which is on the screen right now. And you can contact me anytime after the presentation too, if questions sort of pop up in your mind afterwards. So most of the general information we're covering today is on our website, including the loon calls that you'll be hearing. Our website is also www.northland.edu/Loonwatch. And so this workshop is going to be covering two different programs. The year 2020 is a special year. Every 5 years since 1985, we've been conducting the Wisconsin Loon Population Survey. So during this workshop, we're going to actually have two workshops within it. We're going to be covering material for the Wisconsin Loon Population Survey and the annual lakes monitoring program, which by the name annual implies too that it happens every year. So if you've signed up for the Wisconsin Loon Population Survey, then you've probably received an email from Gavin Fontaine. Gavin is in his second year with Loonwatch as our intern this year. He's doing a wonderful job, and he is going to be teaching the population survey part of this workshop. So that's going to be the first part of this workshop. We'll have a 5-minute break, and then I'll be teaching the second part of the workshop. So we're going to be covering some of the loon basics, including ecology, migration, habitat, behavior, how you can help loons, threats to loons, and then specific directions for each of the volunteer programs. So now Gavin's going to tell you a bit more about himself, and he'll get started teaching the population survey part of our workshop. Gavin, go ahead.
All right, well, hello everybody. I'm Gavin Fontaine. As Erica said, I am the current intern at Loonwatch. This is actually my second year as the Loonwatch intern, and I'm also going into my third year at Northland College. I'm studying natural resources, and this has been a really cool internship, and I've really enjoyed doing it. And today I will be conducting the training workshop for the Wisconsin Loon Population Survey. So I hope everybody can hear me okay. And as we get started, if you do happen to have your survey form and instructions, it might be helpful to have that with you to read along it. So
They won't have their survey form and instructions yet, Gavin.
Okay.
They have their annual lakes monitoring program forms. So no one will have their survey form yet, but we will be getting it to you.
Sounds good. All right, let's get started. Can we advance the slide? Awesome. So Loonwatch has been around since 1978, and it's made up of two major programs. The first program we have is our research programming. So every year, Loonwatch coordinates the annual lakes monitoring program, and you'll be learning more about that from Erica later on. Now that, as the name implies, is an annual survey, and it's made up of a lot of volunteers coming together to survey loons on Wisconsin's lakes. We also coordinate the Wisconsin Loon Population Survey. Now that's what the subject of this workshop is about, and it's a survey that happens every 5 years, and the purpose of that is to estimate the total loon population in Wisconsin. The Loonwatch is also responsible for distributing the Sigurd T. Olson Loon Research Award every year within the field of loon ecology. Can we advance again? And then the other major program within Loonwatch is our educational programming. So every year we coordinate our Speakers Bureau programs, which involves lots of knowledgeable volunteers sharing their own loon experiences through educational presentations. We have a Get the Lead Out program, which provides tackle exchanges and information about the importance of lead-free fishing tackle. And we also do Loon Appreciation Week. Now this happens every year in the first week of May, or as we like to say, whenever you want to celebrate loons. And for this, we distribute thousands of loon posters every year throughout the United States to raise awareness of loon ecology. Can we advance again? And then the rest of these programs that we have are kind of the glue that hold our major components together. Next. So as I mentioned, this part of the workshop is focusing on the Wisconsin Loon Population Survey. Now this is a survey that happens every 5 years on pre-selected lakes in the state of Wisconsin. And the purpose of it is to measure the total loon population and get a good estimate of the entire population in Wisconsin. This survey has been happening since 1985. And in that year, 258 lakes were chosen, and those lakes are resurveyed every year to act as a representative sample of all the lakes in Wisconsin. So this year, we will be conducting the survey again in 2020, and the date of the survey will be July 18th from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. Now this is different from the annual lakes monitoring program, which you'll hear more about later. And because these lakes have to act as a representative sample of all of Wisconsin, this means that you cannot choose your own lake to survey. You must survey the lakes that are on the Loonwatch list for this survey. Now the Wisconsin Loon Population Survey is also one of the most important things that Loonwatch does. Since its beginning in 1985, it's helped us track the loon population and it's made really significant contributions to science. Next. So every 5 years, Loonwatch has done this survey, and in 1985, the loon population estimate was 2,358. The most recent year that we did the survey, 2015, the estimate was 4,350. So if you average it out, that's an increase of approximately 1% every year. And that's great, but this year we're especially looking forward to the survey to see if our data matches up with the long-term data that one of our colleagues is collecting. This data indicates that we may see a different result with fewer loons this year, but we do need as many volunteers as possible to survey lots of our pre-selected lakes to be able to provide statistically significant results to see if this is the case. Next. Can we advance again? Thank you. So this is a picture of an adult loon in its summer breeding plumage. Loons are primarily water birds, and they spend almost their entire lives in the water, except for a short time during the breeding season when they go on shore to nest. The common loon measures about 30 inches from head to tail and is up to a 5-foot wingspan. Adults weigh between 6 and about 13 pounds. On the northern lakes up in this area, loons typically dive for between 45 seconds and a minute. During their migration stages, loons actually use the Great Lakes as staging areas, and on those lakes, they can make dives up to 5 minutes long and 200 feet deep. Loons also have very large legs and feet that sit far back on their body. This makes it extremely difficult for them to walk around on land, and this is really the reason why they spend almost their entire lives in the water. Next. Loons are also a really heavy bird for their size. On average, they weigh about 8 to 12 pounds, and they require up to a quarter mile of aquatic runway to take off, unless they're aided by a strong headwind. Loons often also use multiple lakes, so during the survey, you may see them taking off from your lake and flying to a different lake. Next. So this map shows the common loons' range and migration routes throughout North America. The blue areas show their breeding range in the summer, the orange areas around the coastlines show their winter habitat, and the pink arrows in between show the migration routes. In this area of northern Wisconsin, we are currently at the southernmost edge of their summer breeding habitat. This means that if loons are affected by climate change and human development in the future, we are likely to see those effects here first. The loons from this area tend to migrate to the Gulf of Mexico and sometimes the southern Atlantic coastal waters for the winter. Next. So I'm going to describe a few of the major loon calls that you may have heard before. Each call also has a specific meaning. The first one is the yodel, and this call is only given by the male loons. If you see a loon give this call, it may be one of the only times that you can actually tell the difference between the males and the females. This acts as a territorial call, and it's given to warn other loons that they're ready to stand their ground and defend their territory. You can play it. Go to the next one. So the next one is called the wail, and the rest of these calls are given by both the males and the females. And the wail sounds similar to a wolf howl. We tend to hear this call around dawn and dusk. Loons use this call when they're trying to communicate with each other and find out where other loons are. It almost sounds like they're saying, "Where are you?" The parent loons will also use this call to find each other and to talk to their chicks. And then finally, this call may also be given to warn of a specific predator, the bald eagle. Let's play it. All right, can we go to the next one? So the tremolo, the next one, is the loon's distress or disturbance call. It's often given while protecting the young or protecting their nest. A loon's common predators include eagles and raccoons, among other species, and if humans get too close, this also acts as a warning for you to leave the area. If you hear a loon doing this call, make sure that you adhere to the 200-foot rule. At Loonwatch, we always recommend keeping a distance of at least 200 feet from loons. Can you please play it? All right. So the in-flight tremolo is the next one, and it's very similar to the regular tremolo. However, this call is given while a loon is flying over a lake to see if it's okay to land. If the lake is occupied by a territorial pair, a male loon may yodel in response to let the intruder know that the lake or part of the lake is occupied and will be defended. All right, can you play it, please? Thank you. And then this is the final one, and this sweet, soft-sounding call is the hoot. It's the shortest loon call, and it really acts as a loon hello. This is how loons communicate with each other when they're hanging out in large groups on the Great Lakes called rafts. They do this during the fall and spring migrations. The parents will also use this call to encourage their chicks, and this is what it sounds like. So the next couple slides show a few species that are very commonly confused with loons. In these pictures, they look pretty distinctive, but at a distance, in poor light conditions and bad weather, it can be really easy to make these mistakes. Probably the bird most commonly mistaken for a loon is the common merganser. Although the merganser is white and black, similar to a loon, the patterns are much different as the merganser has solid colors, whereas the loon is speckled. The merganser also has a distinctive red bill. Another defining feature of the merganser is that they can have a lot more chicks than a loon does. Sometimes Loonwatch gets calls from people saying that they see a loon with 8 or more chicks behind it. In this case, it's most likely a merganser, as loons only have 1 to 2 chicks per year. Next. So another lookalike species is the western grebe. Although the western grebe has red eyes like a loon and its chicks right on its back, it has a much longer neck, a smaller body overall, and it sits higher in the water. Next. So the next one is the double-crested cormorant. Like a loon, it sits very low in the water and is similar in size and shape. However, the cormorant's body is completely black except for its orange throat pouch. They also can sometimes be seen sitting in trees, like in the left picture here, which is definitely not a loon behavior. Next. So this picture is a case of mistaken identity. The Loon Ranger who took this picture on a beach in Florida titled it Loons and Gulls. However, if you look really closely, you can see what look like loons from a distance in this bright light are actually common mergansers. As you can see, without the aid of binoculars or a spotting scope, this is a really easy mistake to make. And this is also why it's really important to be able to positively identify common loons during the survey. It's really important to double check with binoculars and refer to a field guide if you need to. Next. So if a loon feels threatened on their nest, their first reaction is to remain inconspicuous. The loon will generally try to crouch down in a hiding position, which we call the hangover posture. You can see it on this slide here. If the disturbance continues, the loon will usually flush off the nest, and this leaves the eggs unprotected. The loon will stay off the nest until it knows the threat is past. If you're close to a loon and it's doing this posture, you should definitely back off. We recommend using the 200-foot rule again. Again, keep a distance of at least 200 feet from loons at all times. Next. So if a loon feels especially threatened on the nest, it'll do the penguin dance, which you can see here. Loon expends lots of energy doing this pose, energy that it would have been using to find prey and defend its chicks. Loons can engage in this due to nearby predators, other loons threatening a territorial takeover, or also if humans get too close. So again, if you see a loon doing this, this is a sign that you're too close and need to evaluate whether or not you're obeying the 200-foot rule. It's important to remember that even quieter activities like canoeing and kayaking can be extremely disruptive. Next. So another pose that loons will do if they feel especially threatened is this, which we call the submarine pose. In this position, the loon reduces the airspace under its feathers and sinks farther down into the water to remain inconspicuous. Loons will often do this if predators get too close or especially on busier lakes where there's a lot of boating activity from humans. So again, if you see a loon doing this, it's a good sign that you need to back off. It's also a good reminder that loons can be really difficult to spot. So if you're doing the survey and you don't see any loons right away, it's a good idea to stick around for a while. Next. So the next couple slides show a few stages in loon phenology and how their chicks develop over the summer. So this chick is 2 weeks old, and at this stage, it will still be really dependent on the parents. During the survey, you're not likely to see a chick this young. Next. So this slide shows a 3-week-old chick. At this stage, it'll be just about starting its molting stage. Next. These chicks are 5 weeks old. You can see how they're molting and starting to grow into their juvenile feathers. During the survey, you may see chicks that are somewhere around this stage, and they could be younger if you see chicks that hatched unusually late, but somewhere around the 4 to 6 or 8 week stage is about where you'll be observing chicks during the survey. Next. So the chick in this picture is about 6 weeks old, and again, it's still in that molting stage and about where you could be seen during the survey. When chicks are a few weeks old, the parents will bring them to a separate nursery area away from the nest with lots of emergent vegetation. At that stage, the parents will be bringing the chicks half-dead prey items like small fish and crustaceans to practice fishing on. Next. Next again. So for the survey, it's really important to remember that you have to be able to positively identify loons in both their adult and chick stages for the survey. Again, low light and bright light conditions, as well as other inclement weather such as wind, fog, and rain can make it very difficult to see. Next again. So this is why it's really important to bring your binoculars, a survey form, and instructions. And the instructions also show color pictures of loons, so those can be another helpful feature in identifying them. And if you have access to it, a field guide is also really helpful. Next. Next again. So a few other things to remember. If you're on the water, be really careful and wear a life jacket if you're using a boat to conduct the survey. Next. Avoid disturbing the loons as you're counting them. Next again. Bring your binoculars, your spotting scope if you have one available, a pencil, the survey form, as well as the map and instructions that are included with it, and a field guide. Next. And then finally, remember, if you're using a boat to conduct the survey, it's really important to check and clean your boat and trailer of invasive species. Next. So as I mentioned, binoculars are one of the most important tools during the survey. As a quick primer of how to use them, the first thing you're going to want to do is adjust the binoculars to the distance between your eyes. You can do this on most binoculars by grabbing the binoculars in the middle and twisting them back and forth until you can see out of both eyepieces. The next thing you want to do is bring your left eye into focus. Try focusing on a faraway object. Only open your left eye and then twist the focus ring in the middle to focus your left eye. Then open your right eye and close your left. And then if the focus depths of your eyes are different, use the diopter on the right lens to focus your right eye so that both of your eyes are in focus. Then when you're using the binoculars, look at the object you're looking at, such as a loon, and then bring the binoculars up to meet your eyes. Keep your eyes on the target as you bring the binoculars up. If you look down into the binoculars and then bring them up to the target, it's really easy to lose what you're looking at. Next. It's also super important to remember to survey the lake that you signed up for. After you signed up, you should have received a confirmation email with links to DNR maps and lake info. If you go on the Loonwatch webpage, the Get Involved page also is another way to double check your lake. If you're still not sure which lake to survey, contact us as soon as possible. Many lakes have the same name, so they have a WBIC number for identification. It's especially important that we survey the same set of lakes every time. Surveying the incorrect lakes invalidates the data we get. And for this reason, we will only use data that comes from the correct lakes. Next. So I mentioned that every lake has a WBIC number, which stands for Water Body Identification Code. This is a unique number assigned to every lake in Wisconsin, and its purpose is to help differentiate lakes that have the same name. As an example of this, how many mud lakes do you think there are in Wisconsin? Next. So this page comes from the DNR website, and it shows the results that come up if you search for mud lake. So this is how many mud lakes there are in Wisconsin. And if we go next again, this is only page 1 of 7 from those results. Next again. And even if we go down to the county level, this is still true. This page shows all the results that come up if we search for Bass Lake in Burnett County. As you can see, there are quite a few, but only the one outlined in red are actually part of the survey. Next. So you can find a lake's WBIC number on the DNR webpage that should have been, again, sent to you in the email that you got when you signed up. If you go to the Facts and Figures tab, that'll show the size of the lake and the WBIC number. Next. Yeah, and if you go to the overview page, that'll show you general information about the lake. And then if you click on the map tab, as you can see here, that brings up a map of the lake and the surrounding area. So you can see all the roads and the boat landing access you need. Next. So the next couple slides are an example of a county map with the locations of all the lakes in that county that are eligible for the survey. It's really important to make sure to visit your lake before the survey so that you know where to go and how to get access. Next. So this page shows a map of Ashland County with all of the lakes that are eligible for the Wisconsin Loon Population Survey highlighted in red. And then the table over on the right here shows from left to right the WBIC number, the lake name, the size of the lake, and then the position in the township and range system. So Loonwatch does have a map of every county in Wisconsin that's a part of the survey. So if you'd like to have that, we can get it to you. Next. Again, it's really important to make sure to go to your lake before the survey. Make sure you can see the entire lake before the survey. This is really easy on small round lakes where you can see the entire thing from one place. However, if you're surveying a bigger lake with bays and islands that obscure part of it, it will require multiple locations. If you're surveying from shore, you can look at figure 1 here, and it shows an example of choosing a few locations that allow you to see the entire lake. If you're surveying from a boat, you can plan out a route that allows you, again, to see the entire lake up close. It's also important to spend at least 30 minutes at the lake on the day of the survey. As I mentioned earlier, loons can be really hard to spot at first, so if you don't see any right away, don't give up. If we use figure 1 as an example, it's a good idea to spend about 10 minutes at each location and then move to another location, spending at least 30 minutes at the lake in total. Next. And then for this survey, we're only looking for the total number of adult loons and chicks on each lake. This means that we do not need a count of nests, eggs, territorial pairs, or other data. Only record loons that you see and are able to positively identify. Do not write down something that you think might be a loon, and it's really okay to be conservative in your count. Also, do not count flyovers. You can only count loons that actually physically land on your lake. Next. It's also really important to fill out the form completely. Don't leave anything blank. Zeros are very important data because we cannot make an accurate estimate of the population if we only survey the lakes that have loons on them. So if you go to a lake and you know there aren't going to be loons there, it's really important to stick around and complete the survey within spending at least 30 minutes on the lake because this really helps our data. Again, loons may appear later even if you don't see any right away. They can be very difficult to spot, especially if they've been disturbed by boats or other human activity. Next. Yeah, again, in this picture here, you can see how loons will try to be as inconspicuous as possible. So this is why it's really important to stay around for a while and survey the lake completely. Next again. So when you're conducting the survey, it's also really important that we do not count loons twice. For this reason, do not count loons that fly onto the lake and land during the survey. Do not count loons that fly over the lake but don't land during the survey. And also do not count loons that you can hear but cannot see. However, it is okay to count loons that are on the lake initially and then take off while you're observing them. These guidelines are in place to avoid the possibility of a loon being counted on one lake and then flying to a different lake and being counted again. So in this way, it keeps our count more accurate. Next. When conducting the survey, it's also very important that we don't count. Fill out the form completely again. Avoid leaving anything blank. And if you don't see any loons on the lake, write 0. Again, please don't leave it blank or write anything else, as this makes it more difficult for our compilers to put in the correct data. Again, we can only use data from forms that have been completely filled in the correct way. Next. So this example shows a few ways that people commonly fill out the form. People very commonly leave it blank, write NA as an example, write out the word 0 if they see no loons, or 5 if they see 5 loons, or put tally marks. Next again. However, the only correct way to fill out the form is to write the actual numeral. If you see 0 loons, write a 0. If you see 5 loons, write the actual number 5. It's really important that we do them all the same way so that our compilers know exactly what to enter after the survey. Again, we won't use data from any forms that are filled out incorrectly. Next. And in addition to that, it's really helpful to make note of what weather conditions, the method of observation, and the equipment you use during the survey. Next. It's especially important to note how you access the lake for future reference. A lot of the lakes that we use don't have any public access. So for these lakes, we rely on volunteer information and access information from riparian landowners. After the survey, describe how you got onto the lake, who you talked to and contacted, and any other relevant information. Next. If you're wearing a boat, again, as I mentioned earlier, make sure to stay safe on the water, wear a life jacket and make sure that it fits snugly. Next. If you're surveying from a powerboat, make sure that it's registered and up to date with all the correct papers. Next. Especially watch out for boats and other wildlife. The boat in this picture is actually breaking a law. It's throwing a wake within 100 feet of shore. Yeah. Next again. And be wary of your safety and watch out for lightning conditions. Next. So the day of the survey this year, as I mentioned, is July 18th. This is the only day the survey needs to be completed. However, we do have, as a last resort, an alternate backup day the next Saturday, July 25th. This is only a bad weather day. It's not for scheduling conflicts. So if you get to the lake and the weather is too dangerous to go out, that day is in place. But the first thing you want to do is, if the weather is too bad to go out, wait around for a while, as sometime within the survey's time frame it may clear up. If absolutely possible, we want to only use one day to keep the survey as accurate as possible. If we use one day, this keeps it more accurate by minimizing the possibility of double counting any loons. Next. So another thing to be aware of is that Wisconsin has been having significant problems with aquatic invasive species. As citizen scientists, we really need to be an example of mitigating these issues. Things like Eurasian water milfoil, curly-leaf pondweed, and zebra mussels are examples of aquatic invasives found in Wisconsin's lakes. These can easily be spread to other lakes via boats and trailers, so help prevent the spread by removing vegetation, draining water from your boat, and washing your boat when you leave a lake. This is very, very important if you're surveying multiple lakes in the same day and bringing your boat in between them. Next. So we're also conducting this survey to help loons, and it's very important to avoid disturbing them and harming them at the same time. Use the 200-foot rule at all times to avoid disturbing loons. Watch out for the agitation and distress behaviors and back off if you see any, like in this picture here. And if you do happen to see a nest, be extremely careful and don't get too close. Again, it's not very likely to run into a nest on July 18th, as most loons will be done nesting by then, but it is possible. Next. After you complete the survey, make sure your form is filled out completely, mark down the survey route on the map that is included with your form, and then return the form and the map the first mailing day after the survey. And then finally, if you didn't complete the survey, it's really helpful to contact us if you were not able to complete it, so we know that your data is not coming. Next. So I'm going to go through a few slides here showing things that you can do to restore your shoreline habitat. Next. So there's a goose on this slide because, as a lot of you probably know, geese love the shoreline habitat that we create with our short lawns. Next again. The same way that loons love small islands, geese love mowed lawns because it allows them to see predators approaching from a great distance away. They can also love to eat the grass. If you replace even just the 15 feet of your shoreline closest to the water with long grass, native plants, you can scare the geese away, improve loon habitat, and slow the flow of runoff into the lake, which improves water quality. Next again. The native plants shown here tend to have deep root systems, which can help anchor the soil in place, absorb nutrients, and lower the water temperature, which will overall improve water quality. Next. The UW Extension also has a Healthy Lakes program, which is shown here, that helps people with shoreline restoration. Through this, they give suggestions for best management practices for riparian habitat. Next. It can also be a really good idea to build a rain garden, next again, and use rain barrels. This helps clean the water and slow the flow of runoff into our water systems. Next. Yeah, you can see here the before and after pictures showing how helpful a rain garden system can be. Next again. It's also really important to help get the lead out of our waterways. Lead is an extremely dangerous toxin for loons, and on the market now, there's a lot of really good options to replace lead tackle in your tackle box. A lot of them are about as effective as lead tackle and cost a very similar amount. Some of the alternative materials include tin, tungsten, steel, and bismuth, to name a few. Check out the list of non-lead manufacturers and retailers on the Loonwatch webpage. Next again. Next again. It can also be extremely helpful to reduce our oil dependency. We're all complicit in this. Next again, actually. Yeah, so we're all reliant on oil, but it can be, again, extremely dangerous to loons. A lot of loons die in oil spills, especially the BP oil spill about 10 years ago. And all of us helping reduce our dependency on oil products can be extremely helpful, both by directly saving loon habitat and by mitigating climate change. Next. It's also really important to help educate your fellow lake users. Become a Loonwatch advocate and help us spread the word about protecting loons and their habitat. Talk to your friends, family, neighbors, and your fellow lake users about what you learned during this program, especially the 200-foot rule, getting the lead out of your tackle box. Loonwatch provides free fact sheets at our events, and you can also purchase online the lead alert and loon alert signs that you see here. And these can be posted on boat landings to let other lake users know about loon ecology. Next. Again, as a Loonwatch volunteer, you're really some of the most educated people on the lake. You can act as loon ambassadors to the rest of the lake community by helping us spread the word about protecting loons. Next. So before my portion is over, I'm going to do a really quick recap over some of the major points to remember for the survey. It's really important to go to your lake ahead of time and know exactly which lake you're surveying and where it is. Count the total adults and chicks on each lake and be able to positively identify individuals and the lookalike species. Make sure not to count flyovers. Only put in information for loons that are physically on the lake during the survey. Fill out the form completely with numerals and nothing else, as you can see in the example here. And then finally, fill out the form and return it immediately after the survey. Next. All right, so yeah, I think my portion is over now. So I guess we'll be taking a 5-minute break and then I'll be turning it over to Erica. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat or email me or Erica later with any questions. Thank you so much for attending this workshop.
Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you for advancing the slides also.
Yeah, I apologize for the delays, everyone. My chat box was covering a couple times the microphone, the play button there. So, Erica, would it be okay if we had everyone stretch their legs and we join up at 1:45? I know that's a couple more than 5 minutes. What do you think?
I think that's great. I could use a little stretch too.
Okay.
Thanks.
Perfect. And I see one person did submit a question to the chat box. So if you have any other questions, send away, and we'll definitely get to those after Erica's portion. Welcome back from your break, everyone. I've been enjoying looking at this beautiful loon photo on my screen. They're just gorgeous. All right, I'll turn it over to you, Erica.
Okay, great. And that on that screenshot, that little chick is doing something called a foot waggle. So if you see an adult or a chick doing something like that, sometimes I've heard from Loon Rangers with some concerns that something is wrong with the loons. That's actually a comfort movement. That little loon is stretching. So next slide. Okay, oops. So I'm going to be covering the annual lakes monitoring program part of this workshop. So if you have any questions about the population survey, and the annual lakes monitoring program, we will cover that at the end of the workshop when I'm done here. Okay, next slide. So there are actually 5 total species of loons in the world. The majority of the species, the 4 other species, are found breeding in the Arctic regions of the planet. So that's why we don't see them, or a lot of us don't know about them down here in the lower 48. The first one I'm going to tell you about is the yellow-billed loon. Probably the most expensive loon to go and visit because it really only exists in the north slope of Alaska and in remote parts of Russia. It's the most closely related to the common loon, and it is also the largest loon. Next slide. The Pacific loon is actually the most common loon found in Alaska, and you'll find that in the Pacific coast and nesting inland and lakes in Alaska. It's a New World loon primarily, but you'll see the Pacific loon mixing sometimes with, next slide, the Arctic loon in western Alaska and in eastern Siberia. So the Pacific loon and the Arctic loon look very similar to each other. Only difference that you can tell is the color of their neck iridescence. Next slide. The red-throated loon is probably the only loon that you might be able to spy because it does migrate through the Great Lakes. So coming up soon, probably in mid-May, you might be able to see a red-throated loon as it migrates to its Arctic breeding areas. It is also the smallest loon, and it can take off from a sitting position. All the other loons need an aquatic runway of some sort, where the red-throated loon is able to take off from a sitting position. Next slide. So this is the common loon range map for the globe. Worldwide, there are approximately 640,000 common loons, and we think that we're the center of the loon universe here because we have so many loons in the upper Midwest, but actually 93% of all loons are found in Canada, with about 591,000 loons. About 6% of all loons are found in the US, with about 37,000 loons. And Greenland and Iceland comprise about 5,000 loons. This is the loons that we find in their breeding range. Next slide. So spring migration can be an exciting time. And right now I know some of our lakes in southern Wisconsin are opening up and people are starting to see loons down there. This is Lake Monona in Madison, Wisconsin. And loons are really one of the harbingers of spring. They're one of the first birds that we see on the water. And as they make their way up to northern Wisconsin, they'll sort of hopscotch up. They will fly over lakes to the north and see if they're open. And if they're open, they'll land. If they're not open, they'll go back south to the nearest open water. As loons fly north, and they're still looking for their territorial lake to open up, they may actually find a river such as the Wisconsin River to land on. I've heard stories from Loon Rangers who bring their artificial nesting platforms out early in the season, and their territorial pair will be following them out as they row their nesting platform out. So spring migration can be a very exciting time. Next slide. It can also be a rather hazardous time for loons. So this loon is on a wet parking lot. So loons, as they're migrating, they see a wet parking lot or a flooded agricultural field, and they will mistake those for bodies of water. And so this loon is actually walking. As Gavin described earlier, loons' legs are located far back on their body, and so they cannot walk. They sort of shuffle with their wings and their feet to be able to move on land. A loon in this situation is not able to achieve flight. It will need a human help to be able to take it to the nearest large water body to be able to get out of that situation. If a loon is left in this situation, it's either going to succumb to the elements or it's going to succumb to probably some predator that will get to it. So those of you who are maybe interested in rescuing a loon, you need to take into consideration some traits and behaviors of loons. They will not understand that you're trying to rescue them. And so they will try to defend themselves. And they have two main lines of defense. They're very sharp bill they will use to try and stab you. And also, if you are able to pick them up, another line of defense they have is to defecate on you. And so their loon poop and pee really smells like rotten fish because that's what they eat. So you have to be prepared for that. We recommend if you feel uncomfortable with attempting to rescue a loon that you call someone to help with that. So someone from the DNR, from a rehabilitation center. The thing that you need to keep in mind, though, is that these loons, despite the fact that they're on land and they have a hard time moving, they will move. So you need to stay with that loon until help arrives, and that's what we recommend the most. The other thing, too, is if you do attempt to rescue a loon, you'll want to use a towel or something to cover it with so it can't see as well, and then it is less stressed. The more that it can see, the more stressed it'll be. Never, ever swaddle a loon. Never wrap it in a towel. Loons do not have diaphragms like we do, so if you swaddle it, it will not be able to breathe. So you want to put it in a large box that has some holes, a large cardboard box that has some holes, put in there for air, and then you want to put some towels or a blanket in the box so that the loon can rest its keel on something soft. It has a very distinct sharp keel, and also any kind of hard objects can injure the loon's feet or wings, and it will try to escape. Again, it doesn't understand that you're trying to help it. But those are the recommendations I have. Mostly I would recommend if you want to help it to try and get someone who may be a little bit more skilled in that. Next slide. So loons have a lot of different predators. The most common predator that it has is the bald eagle. And loons and eagles have a millennia worth of predator-prey relationship. It's a natural predator of loon eggs, loon chicks, and even adult loons it will take if it senses that the adult loon is weakened or old or something. But there are other predators that really are not good to have around because they're brought in by humans. Next slide. Such as ravens and crows. Next slide. Gulls. Next slide. Raccoons. All of these predators are brought in by the presence of humans, human refuse, human food that they find around. And so we've found that those predators are taking loon eggs, but normally under natural circumstances, they wouldn't. Next slide. Other predators such as minks. Next slide. Snapping turtles. And next slide. Large predatory fish such as northerns, muskie, and bass will all take chicks, and those are all natural predators of loon chicks. Next slide. So there are a number of threats to loons. Probably one of the biggest threats is the loss of habitat, as Gavin mentioned. Next slide. So this is a really interesting map of the past and present common breeding range in North America. If you take a good look at that map, that dashed line that goes across North America is the historical southern limit of where loons used to nest. So loons in our area used to nest in Ohio, in southern Michigan, in northern Indiana, northern Illinois, and even in Iowa. And what really sort of chased them north was development of our lakes and the areas around our lakes. And so it pushed them up to their current range, that dotted area that you see in northern Michigan, northern Wisconsin, and northern Illinois. Next slide. But even these areas are under threat for development, and we really need to do the right kinds of things that Gavin mentioned, how to help protect loons to ameliorate this threat. So this is an interesting map. It's a 1940 housing density map of northern Wisconsin. And so just to interpret that map, the light yellow areas are 0 to 5 housing units per square mile. And as it gets into darker orange and then into red, those are greater housing densities. The red is 360 or more housing units per square mile. So I want you to pay particular attention to the areas where there's a lot of blue. So those areas are where we have a lot of lakes, obviously Oneida, Vilas, Iron, Sawyer, Washburn, Burnett, Bayfield, Douglas counties, all our northern counties, Forest County that have a lot of lakes have been developed. We're going to fast forward 50 years to 1990, and I want you to pay particular attention to where you see a lot of red. Next slide. So we love our lakes. We're going to fast forward another 20 years to the year 2010. Next slide. We really love our lakes. So I am a transplant from southern Wisconsin. I'm from Watertown, which is between Madison and Milwaukee. And I moved up here because I remember having these wonderful experiences in northern Wisconsin. And truth be told, my entire family moved up here. My brother, my parents, my sister-in-law is from northern Illinois. The only native to northern Wisconsin that was born here is my little nephew. So we all have really enjoyed our lakes, and that's a huge draw. The woods and waters of northern Wisconsin are a huge draw, but we need to really be careful about how we treat those places and try to keep them in as natural of a state as possible and be respectful to the wildlife and to the surrounding area. Next slide. So kind of what goes hand in hand with development can be poor water quality. So loons are visual predators. They need to be able to see their prey to pursue it. And so they need good water clarity. And one of the ways that, that folks on lakes can measure water clarity is through something called a Secchi disc. And so if you see that chart on the lower right-hand part of your screen, that's a measure of water clarity using a Secchi disc. So if you lower this, this little instrument down into the water, once it disappears and you look at the rope, that indicates how deep you are able to see. And so on the left-hand side of that chart is a percentage of presence of loons. So to interpret this chart, you would look at the right-hand side, lakes that have greater than 20 feet of water clarity, 70% of those lakes are occupied by loons. Whereas you look to the left side of that chart, lakes that have less than 5 feet of water clarity, only about 20% of those lakes are occupied by loons. There's a direct correlation between the occupancy of loons and the water clarity of the lakes. And so it's very important. Loons are really an indicator of healthy aquatic ecosystems, and the presence of loons can really indicate healthy aquatic ecosystems. And loons will not be found on lakes that have less than 2.5 feet of water clarity. They won't be living on those lakes. They may be passing through, but they won't stay for any amount of time. Next slide. So as Gavin mentioned, how you can help protect loons is by purchasing non-lead tackle and being very careful with your monofilament line too. So 20% of necropsy loons were found to have died from lead poisoning, and it just takes the smallest little lead shot and it will kill a loon in 2 to 3 weeks. And so replacing your lead tackle with non-lead tackle is a really important way to accomplish that, to help protect loons. On our website, we have a list that is 3 pages long of manufacturers and distributors of non-lead tackle. Take that list to your local tackle supply shop and ask them to, if they don't have any non-lead tackle, to please sell non-lead tackle. The other picture there on the left shows a loon that has been entangled in monofilament line. We are unfortunately seeing this more and more, and that loon was unable to eat. You can see sort of toward the end of toward the mouth part, there's a piece of lead tackle there. If that loon swallowed that lead tackle, it would have gotten poisoned. It's really important to recycle your monofilament line. There's a new program, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources doing this wonderful new program. And if you look up recycle monofilament line Wisconsin DNR, you can find out where the recycling centers are. There are little boxes where you can take your monofilament line to at specific DNR centers that are participating in this. If you can't take your monofilament line to one of these recycling centers, you can cut it into 6-inch lengths, and then it's safe and it won't entangle wildlife. Next slide. So here's some examples of threats to loons, and I think probably the top 2 pictures are what you would expect to see. So fast-moving boats that produce large wakes, they can run over loons, especially loon chicks. Loon chicks cannot dive deeply, especially the young downy covered loon chicks, and so you risk killing a loon by running over it. So really going slowly on lakes when loons are nesting, and especially when they have young chicks, is really important. Also, loons nest right next to the water line. So their nest is literally 6 to 12 inches from the water. And so a big wake can wash over a loon nest and bring the eggs into the water with it. Now, why would those slow-moving water sports be a threat? As Gavin mentioned, using the 200-foot rule is really important, because if a loon feels suddenly startled, and from about early May until early July is when we find loons nesting a lot. And so during those times of year, it's important to give the shoreline, especially naturally vegetated shoreline, like you see in those pictures, a wide berth, because loons might be nesting there. If they're startled, they're going to leave the nest and they won't come back until they're safe. If they are very suddenly startled, they will leave the nest. When they're nesting, they have the eggs on top of their feet. And if they are suddenly startled, those eggs could roll into the water as they leave the nest very suddenly. And they will not be able to bring those eggs back onto the nest. So giving loons a wide berth during these, when you're enjoying these slow moving water sports is pretty critical as well. Next slide. Okay, so there are some interesting emerging threats that are happening. So the next series of maps that you're about to see are Audubon's climate change model for the common loon. So according to Audubon, by about 2080, loons are forecast to lose 56% of their current summer range and 75% of their current winter range. In both of these seasons, the potential to shift northward in a warming climate is significant, and it looks pretty certain that Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan will lose our beautiful loons by the end of the century. So I want to sort of interpret this map, and we'll go through these slides slowly. So that, as you can see, the yellow area is the summer range, and the blue area is the winter range. And this is the year 2000. We're going to forward click once to get to 2020. So you can still see in northern Wisconsin, especially in Minnesota, they're showing that we still have loons. But by 2050, if you click to the next slide, they're pretty much just in the Minnesota arrowhead. And by 2080, next slide, they are in northern Canada. But there is sort of a word of caution here. Audubon scientists are using two main factors to develop this model. That's temperature and precipitation. So on the basis of those two factors, plus the current distribution of loons, and then they're also looking at the projected future climate based on the report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's how they produce these animated maps that we all probably find very disturbing. But their projection is likely to provide a crude estimate of the impact of climate change on loons and not an exact one. So they weren't taking into consideration some of the other things that are really affecting loons and climate change. Things like water quality, the type of lake that affects the water quality, lake levels, which is something a lot of us are experiencing right now, the level of water in the lake, lake development, recreation, etc. So while this is disturbing, we are going to keep our eyes on the ground and make sure that we are recording exactly what's happening. So perhaps it's not as foreboding, but this is definitely a warning of what may be coming. Next slide. I'll click again. So this is a really interesting chart that describes major rain events or drought in Wisconsin since the year 1900. So this was produced by NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, their National Centers for Environmental Information State Climate Summary. And this is specifically for Wisconsin. So if you're interested in seeing this full report, which I recommend that you do, you're going to want to Google what's on the left-hand side of your screen, the National Centers for Environmental Information State Climate Summaries, Wisconsin. Google that and you will be able to get to that report. If you type in the name of any other state that you might be interested in, then you can get to those reports too. So specifically for Wisconsin, this is what it shows, this graph. I think it's most interesting that they define an extreme precipitation event as the number of days with precipitation above 2 inches. Now, if you look at that graph, the dark teal areas are precipitation events that are above 2 inches, and then the light teal areas are are indicating drought. So as you can see, at the far right end of this chart, it shows 2010 through 2014, and that has the most rain events. So this is the most current reports by the Centers for Environmental Information. So we obviously don't have the last 6 years, which has a whole lot more rain events that we have experienced. And I'm describing this because I'm hearing from more and more Loon Rangers through their monitoring forms and through their inquiries into artificial nesting platforms that these rain events are not just affecting our seepage lakes, but they're affecting our drainage lakes. The lake levels are really up, and sometimes they are covering loon nesting habitat. And we have been experiencing some pretty extreme rain events where this happens sometimes overnight. I've heard Loon Rangers call me after a 1 or 2 day rain event saying that our lake levels went up 6 inches, 8 inches, and it's completely drowned out the nest. So next slide. And so this I just wanted to go through some of these extreme rain events. So you can see that this 2012 rain event really affected Duluth and northern Minnesota, but it also affected northern Wisconsin. If you look over in the lower left-hand portion of the map, there's a key that shows rain in inches. Douglas, Bayfield, Iron, Ashland, and Sawyer counties all experienced rain in excess of 2 inches. Parts of Sawyer County were up to 5 to 6 inches during this rain event. And look at the dates. This is June 19th to 20th. What's happening now is some loons may still be nesting. So this really could have an impact on those later nests and keep them from hatching. Next slide. So here is another big rain event. So this probably didn't affect nesting because it was July 14th. So this is the 2016 storm that we experienced. However, look at the quantities of rain across northern Wisconsin. Anywhere from 2 to 10 inches of rain fell in a pretty significant geographical swath of northern Wisconsin. And so that definitely, I heard from Loon Rangers talking about losing nesting habitat, and it started to really impact lake water levels. Next slide. So here's some pictures from the destruction to just man-made things that happened during that rain event. You can see the person looks pretty small in the left-hand corner of that picture, and also the cars compared to the destruction ravaged during that rain event. So next slide. And here is another, this was incredible. In June 18th of 2018, we had mostly rainfall from 4 to 15 inches in some place that fell across an incredible huge area of northern Wisconsin. And this probably more than, in addition to some of these other rain events, has really caused lake levels to rise, not only on our inland lakes, but also on our Great Lakes. You may have heard this in the news, but this is definitely having an impact on loon nesting. So next slide. So here again is some of the destruction from that 2018 event. I remember I had to, my commute was an hour longer because of some of the road closures, and the roads were closed for months up here. So this is really having an impact not only on our ability to get around, but as you can see also on the water quality of our lakes and streams too. It really churns up the sediments when we have these rain events, and can really cause problems with water clarity, and that's problematic for loons. Next slide. So as Gavin mentioned, one of our colleagues, Walter Piper, is doing the Loon Project in northern Wisconsin. Now, he is looking at 100 lakes in Oneida County, so you can see that yellow county highlighted. And he's been doing this for 27 years. And so we've been communicating quite a bit, because some of the emerging data that he's seeing has implications that may show up in our population survey. So click. So he's seeing that the incidence of chicks reaching 5 weeks old has fallen by 1.1% annually since he's been collecting his data in 1993. He's also seeing that 5-week-old chicks are weighing 10.5% less than in 1993. Click. There are fewer 2-chick broods. So usually you'll see a number of 2-chick broods, but he's seeing a lot less. There's more, 53% of broods in the early years were single broods. From 2014 to 2019, it jumped to 73%. And then click. And then a decreasing floater population. And I'm going to describe to you what a floater is later on. But so there's a lot fewer territorial evictions, which sounds good, but there's less pressure on loons, and so it's interesting to note that that there is less territorial pressure, which means there's probably a smaller population of loons is what we're thinking. And then the threat from being evicted from territory. So loons are very territorial. Territorial pairs, which are 2 loons, a male and female, will defend their territory, and oftentimes they will be challenged from other floaters and intruders to their territory. So their threat of being evicted is only 20%, where before it was 25% about 20 years ago. So all of that is indicating that possibly we might start to see a smaller loon population. So that makes our population survey especially important this year. Click. Another emerging threat are big wakeboards, or big wake boats. So I've actually heard from 2 Loon Rangers this year talking about not just big wake boats, but possibly speedboat racing on some of our very small northern Wisconsin lakes. So if you could click and then click again. This can have big implications for nesting loons, especially if this racing and these big wake boats are done during nesting season. And again, I'll remind you, nesting season can be as early as the beginning of May and then all the way through the beginning of July. And what happens is as I mentioned before, the wake can wash out the nest. But as loons are searching for food, the adult loons are searching for food, so they have the energy to take care of the, the nest and chicks. This can really churn up the bottom of the lake and decrease the water clarity. And then by churning up the bottom of the lake, it also increases sediments and the nutrients that are found in some of those sediments. And so it can also increase the likelihood of algal blooms because you have all these nutrients being presented within the sediments that are being churned up. And so again, decreased water clarity, lessening the water quality. And then these boats, when they're moving very fast, have a very difficult time avoiding loons. A lot of times when I see boats racing across the lake, it seems that they don't even see loons as they're driving straight toward them. And so that can be dangerous. But it is important for everyone who is helping to protect loons to know that it is unlawful. It is against the law for anyone to chase, harass, or disturb wildlife, including loons, and that it is also illegal to operate a vessel within 100 feet of the shore, any dock or raft or pier by throwing a wake. So you cannot throw a wake, you cannot legally throw a wake within 100 feet of shoreline. So that does offer some protection, but a lot of people I don't think are aware of this, especially as I've watched people on lakes. And so it's important to be a friendly educator when it comes to some of these emerging threats. Next slide. Okay, so now I want to go over kind of the differences between the Annual Lakes Monitoring Program and the Wisconsin Loon Population Survey. So the Annual Lakes Monitoring Program, we're asking a lot more of our volunteers in the Annual Lakes Monitoring Program. We're asking for them to monitor once a week from ice out to migration, and they're going to be looking at phenology and productivity data. So by phenology, kind of the seasonal differences that are happening throughout the breeding season to loons. So when are they arriving? Are they pairing up? Is there a territorial pair? Are they defending territory? Are those pairs nesting? Are they producing chicks? And are those chicks surviving to adulthood? And when are they leaving? Are they leaving early? Are they leaving later? So we're collecting all of that information. Whereas with the population survey, we're only collecting on one certain day the number of adults and the number of chicks. So the Annual Lakes Program, volunteers can select whichever lake they want to monitor. The population survey, we have those pre-selected lakes. So those lakes were selected based on the type of lake, and they are all different size classes, and therefore they are representative of all lakes in Wisconsin, and that makes a statistically significant survey. We cannot add or subtract those lakes. Here we can add and subtract lakes based on whether or not the volunteer wants to monitor. We're collecting different kind of data. Next slide, or click, yeah, okay, click again. And very similar to the population survey, we want you to be well equipped. So we want you to bring your monitoring form along. We want you to be able to positively identify adults, chicks, and juveniles. You can do this with a really good field guide. We have some selections and recommendations there below. The Kaufman, the National Geographic, and Sibley are all excellent field guides. You can also go online. I like All About Birds, eBirds, and there's one other one, and Audubon. All have really good online guides to the birds of North America, and especially for loons. You want to have a good pair of binoculars. I would say your field guide and a good pair of binoculars are really essential. And then again, it is difficult without binoculars to be able to positively identify loons in these low light and bright light conditions and wind, fog, and rain. A good pair of binoculars are worth their weight in gold. Next. Okay, yeah. And so again, I'm repeating this, but it bears repeating. Be careful when you go out in a boat or canoe, wear your life jacket. And I would prefer also that you bring a buddy. Buddy system is really a safety tool. Click. Try to avoid disturbing the loons as you count them. So remember that 200-foot rule. I do know that on some lakes, loons become really accustomed to the recreational activity. And so sometimes you may accidentally get closer and the loons are undisturbed, but generally we recommend that 200-foot rule. Next slide. So again, bring your equipment and be prepared to write down all of the things that you are observing during the time that you're out on the lake. Next slide. And then again, remember to check your boat for aquatic invasives. There are some Loon Rangers in this program who monitor more than one lake. And so if you're doing that in the same day, please make sure that you remove the aquatic invasives and wash your boat before you bring your boat into another body of water. That's very important. Next. And then have fun. This is a really good time to be out there. You're going to be learning a lot. Loons are very charismatic animals. I always, the scientists refer to loons as charismatic megafauna. I call them the Walt Disney species of the North. I'm always amazed that we haven't seen a Disney movie made about loons, given how fun they are to watch. So enjoy your time out there and tell us all about it. Click. Okay, so for the annual lakes monitoring program, you're going to be documenting every week a number of different things. You're going to be documenting the presence of territorial adults. So what does that mean? These are a pair of loons, and usually they arrive around mid-April. The male will be the first to arrive, and then the female like a few days to a week later. And they will be hanging out very close to each other, and they won't start nesting right away. Why don't they start nesting right away? Because they've had this incredible migration. They've migrated anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500 miles. So they really need to replenish their reserves to get ready for that nesting season. So they're arriving mid-April and they start nesting in mid-May. In the meantime, they're really bonding. They're doing a lot of pair bonding, and they're defending their territory. So they'll have a certain area on a lake, anywhere from 50 to 150 acres. If it's a small round lake, that's all they will be defending. They won't let other loons on that lake, but they will be defending their territory from other loons and other birds and other mammals. They really want to keep they're practicing they're practicing social distancing, folks, so that when you think of territorial adults, that's what they're doing, those territorial pairs. But they will be pretty close to each other, and they'll be staying relatively close to each other until they start nesting. So next slide. You're also going to be documenting the presence of floaters. So what is a floater? A floater is a loon or loons that are not part of a territorial pair. So they're not defending territory. They may be existing on a part of a lake that is not part of a territorial pair, or not part of the territory of a pair. They may become what I call an intruder. So they may intrude on that territory and they may check out to see what that territorial pair is doing, if they're successfully nesting. But generally they are existing on that lake, and they're trying to do their own fishing and swimming and taking care of themselves. Okay, next slide. We also want to know the proportion of territorial pairs. So territorial pair is a male and a female loon. We want to know the proportion of them that are nesting. So just because you have a territorial pair on a lake that are defending territory and chasing other loons and birds away doesn't mean they're nesting. They could be facing some dangers from humans that keep them from nesting. They could be facing dangers from predators that keep them from nesting. Their nesting area could be underwater because of lake level changes, or there could be an intruder that comes in and keeps disturbing them and keeping them from nesting and testing their pair bond and maybe even getting into a territorial dispute. So some loons may be nesting, some territorial pairs may be nesting, some territorial pairs may not be nesting. We want to know how many are nesting and how many are not nesting. Next slide. We also want to know the number of nest attempts. So all of those things that I mentioned, predation, human disturbance, territorial aggression, lake levels can cause loons to do more than one nest attempt. So I've seen loons attempt to nest even up to 3 times. So we want to know how many times they've attempted to nest, if they've been successful, and also if they've changed location during those nest attempts. Okay, next slide. And then clutch size. So loons, again, as I mentioned, they arrive mid-April, and usually they start nesting about a month later. Sometimes it can be earlier, sometimes it can be later based on what they're experiencing out there. But they typically lay their eggs around mid-May, and they usually lay 1 to 2 eggs. And they hatch typically around mid-June. And so you could see 1 to 2 chicks hatching. Next slide. We also want to know nest success. So here are a couple of adorable little chicks on the back of their parent loon. Both male and female take care of the chicks. And we want to know if chicks hatched, even if they survived for 1 day, that is nest success. So that means that a chick hatched. Next slide. And then chick survival. So this is probably an 8 to 10 week old chick. And so if chicks make it to about the 8-week mark, then we know that they're probably going to survive to migrate. So it's important that you keep track of when those chicks hatch so that you can know approximately how old they are. And then next slide. So I wanted to give you some examples of what you might be seeing out there, and just to give you a better idea of what a territorial pair is going to be looking like and doing. And so here, if you watch this pair of loons for at least 15 to 20 minutes and they stay together like this, that means that they are a territorial pair. And especially if another loon comes in, they're probably going to go over to meet that loon, and they may have what some people call a coffee clutch. This is actually an intruder, a floater that's coming in to check out their territory. So they're going to be sticking together for most of the time until they start nesting. And so all of a sudden, you're going to notice that your territorial pair, there's only 1 loon in that area. Why? Because 1 loon is on the nest and 1 loon is out in the water taking care of itself, fishing, preening, doing what it needs to do to take care of itself. If you didn't figure out where the nest is, this is an opportunity to do so. So you'll want to find that one loon that's hanging out in the territory, and then watch. You're going to have to watch for a good 2 to 3 hours probably until they switch places. And so that loon will be heading for shoreline, and you watch that loon, and then the other loon will come off the nest, and that loon will get onto it. So that's a good way to find the nest in a kind of unobtrusive way. So next slide. So this is very obvious behavior of a territorial pair. So this is sort of mating behavior. They're doing this bill dipping. They'll dive in tandem with each other, and they will culminate by mating on the nest location, and that could happen more than once. So you know, good indication that that's territorial to pairs. That is that bill dipping. Okay, next slide. So again, I mentioned intruders. Intruders are floaters that are coming into a territory of a pair. And here, this is just, it looks like they're just sort of checking each other out. There's probably a lot of communication that's happening here that we are really not aware of. And so, you know, this could just be what some folks call the coffee clutch, or it could be a little bit more. It could get into aggressive behavior. So next slide. So this is just a loon stretching its wing, but next slide. But these are ritualistic wing flaps. So this is a kind of a sign of aggression, and it can culminate into, next slide, into a territorial dispute. And so a territorial dispute is when two loons get into a physical altercation. And so they will sometimes chase each other across the lake. They'll dive and they'll chase each other underwater. They can cause, one loon can chase the other and cause it to do that penguin dance. They will attack each other. They will use their necks to try and push each other underwater. And sometimes it results in death. One loon can stab the other loon in the sternum and even pierce its heart. But territorial disputes, people like Walter Piper have been studying territorial disputes for a long time and have learned a lot of information by studying them. So territorial disputes are always done where one male versus the other male, or a female versus another female. It's never the opposite sex. And so you could see, say, a female sitting back and watching the two males sort of going at it. Even if she's been with her resident male for 10 or 15 years, if that intruder wins the territorial dispute, she will go with the intruder, and she will nest with him if it's still in season, or she will just stay with him on territory. Usually they're doing this during nesting season because they want to pass on their genes, their genetic material. And so this is a really important time to be really taking note of what's happening out there. We want to know if you're observing a territorial dispute. And the way that Walter was able to identify that it was male versus male, or female versus female, is that loons in certain parts of northern Wisconsin, in Oneida, Vilas, Forest, Florence, and Iron counties, there was, and still, Walter still is, banding loons. And so when they band loons, they give them plastic bands that have a specific color combination, as well as a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service band. And so there are two color bands on one leg, the Silver Fish and Wildlife Service band on another leg, as well as another color band. This is like giving a loon a social security card. No two loons have the same color combination out there. And so they were able to identify individuals. They're able to tell if it was a male or female. And they're able to tell who was displaced, and then if there's a new loon on the lake. So a lot of information was gleaned by observing territorial disputes. They also know that loons don't mate for life. They are more married to their territory than they are to each other. So a couple of things that you can remember that you can say to remember this is it's all about real estate, location, location, location. So if loons find really great habitat, abundant prey source, and good water quality, that is a great location, and other loons are going to be competing for that. Also, because they don't necessarily stay with each other. If you, in the words of a famous song, if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. Okay, next slide. So again, here are some intruders, and this is probably later in the season as loons that have been attempting to nest, maybe their nests failed, or maybe they were unable to nest because of one of the many reasons I listed. They will become part of a floating rogue loons that are out there. And so later in the season, there will be more than one loon that will more likely intrude on territory. This is not set in stone. It can be early that you see a group of loons intruding, but generally, generally speaking, this is what you see happen. And also, what I forgot to mention during that territorial dispute slide is sometimes the intruding loon will go after the chick, and they will kill the chick or they will destroy the nest to disrupt that pair bond. So there is sort of the dark side of the loon. And these groups of loons, if they're able to get to a chick, they will do that too. But this is obviously not culminating in anything. They're just checking each other out. Okay, next slide. So again, here's a group of loons. It could be an intruding group of loons, but those are floaters. So especially later on in the season, you'll see groups of loons that we call floaters. Next slide. So again, as I mentioned, loons lay 1 to 2 eggs, and they can be, this is a really interesting example in one nest of they can look quite different. They're a little bit bigger than the size of a or about the size of a goose egg. They're olive in color. They can be speckled, or they can just be unspeckled as well. Next slide. And they lay them in mid-May. So loons really require a specific kind of nesting habitat. They like irregular shaped shoreline and natural vegetation and quiet areas of the lake to nest. And as you can see, the loon nest is right next to the water. Click. And some of these nests can be really a well-developed looking cup-shaped nest. And next slide. Or they can be pretty nondescript. So they'll lay their nests in different kinds of vegetation too. So these are marshy areas. And next slide. Tag alder and black ash. And next, that's fine. And then what they really tend to prefer are these hummocky little islands. And a lot of times the loons themselves will build a nest like that. You can actually watch them early on in the season. It looks like they're doing something very strange. They'll be sort of pushing, they'll pick up some muddy vegetation and then flip it behind their back. And it doesn't look like they're doing much, but after about 3 weeks, they can build up these hummocky little nests. And this may not look like ideal habitat to us, but this is perfect because a loon can see 360 degrees around it. It can see a predator coming from a long distance off, especially a mammalian predator like a mink or a raccoon that's swimming toward it. It will use that bill to hurt that predator and keep it from getting to the nest, as well as an eagle. It will be able to see an eagle coming from a long ways off too. I've heard of loons sort of pushing themselves up to try and stab an eagle breast as it's swooping down toward the nest. Next slide. So this is a really good example of why it's important to get out early to be able to monitor those nesting locations. So as you can see, this is in a marshy area, probably some cattails around there, and see those little bitty green vegetation that's coming up in front of the nest. In 2 weeks' time, that nest is going to be very hard to see. So the earlier you get out to find that nest, the easier you'll be able to find it. So next slide. This is not nesting habitat, as it says at the top of the slide. You will never find a loon nesting on a rocky shoreline close to human habitation. So you don't really need to look for a loon in this kind of habitat. Next slide. So sometimes we humans like to interfere, so to speak, and try to help a loon with a loon pair, I should say, with an artificial nesting platform. So this is not without a great deal of thought and energy that goes into possibly putting a platform out there. The reason for a platform, there are three main reasons, and all of them imply that humans have changed the habitat such that the loons need help. One is water level fluctuations, oftentimes on flowage, or because of climate change. We are experiencing these water level fluctuations, and a platform may be needed in those situations. Because of predation, so when loons nest, especially on the mainland shore, predators like raccoons will learn that they're nesting, and they tend to nest in the same location. So the raccoon will be like, oh, easy pickings, I'm just gonna go and get myself some loon eggs. So that will happen over and over again. You want to put an artificial nesting platform out. In that instance, if it's happening more than 3 years in a row, and then if the shoreline is just so developed that there is no place for a loon to nest, a platform might be a solution, but if it's so developed, it might be that the recreation on that lake may just turn a loon off from nesting there entirely. And so you may need to, it depends on if you're on a DNR, what DNR defines as an area of special natural resource concern. You also may need to purchase a permit to do this. In any case, permit or not, I highly recommend that you contact your local DNR biologist and the nearest landowner to where you're placing that platform, and let them know what you're going to do. If something like this is put out on a lake and no one from DNR is aware of it, no other nearby landowner is aware of it, it is likely that that will be taken down because they are not going to know what the purpose is of it, and it might be in a place that is inappropriate. So you never want to put a platform in an area that has a lot of recreation. This is not for your viewing pleasure. This is for loons to be reproducing. So it usually has to go either adjacent to where a nesting area is, or to a quiet area of the lake. These platforms, I used to send out plans for platforms using PVC. I am no longer doing that. A lot of research has been done that show that plastics are in water, even in the boundary waters. And so we're really encouraging folks to use these more natural nesting materials, such as wood, such as cedar logs. However, this is a lot heavier than the PVC, and it really needs to be maintained. As you can see in the lower left-hand portion of this picture, this platform is starting to sink. So if it is not maintained, eventually the nesting area will be underwater. Loons who have been successfully nesting on a platform sometimes won't care, and they'll go back and they'll lay their eggs in water and they won't hatch. So it's really important that the nest be maintained. It needs to be maintained for its lifetime. So if the person who has been designated the artificial nesting platform person has to move or leaves for some reason, someone else needs to take over the duties, because the loons have really become dependent on that platform. So it's sort of a cautionary tale. The other part of this is, even if you put an artificial nesting platform out there to try and help the loons, it doesn't mean that the loons are going to use it. So you could be putting forth all sorts of effort and money into this platform and the loons won't use it. However, if you do that, I would recommend giving it at least 5 years to try and change its mind. Also, in this era of climate change, we are experiencing extremes. We are experiencing these extreme rain events, and so we're experiencing these extreme water level changes. We could also be experiencing drought. And so where nesting area has disappeared, it might reappear. So we need to also be nimble because the loons have been doing this for millennia. We haven't. So if their nesting area reappears, then we want to give them the chance to nest in the natural nesting habitat, and thereby you're going to want to pull that platform back on land. So next slide. So again, Gavin mentioned defensive postures. This loon actually is difficult to see. I would say it looks probably like a cedar log. Look, it's sort of in the lower center of the picture. That is a loon on a nest doing the hangover posture. And that is a loon that is feeling especially nervous. So their first line of defense is to be inconspicuous. This loon is basically trying to be inconspicuous so that you'll pass by it. And this is a good indication for you to back off and give that loon the 200 foot of space that it really needs. Because if it is suddenly startled, it could pop off that nest and bring the eggs with it. Next slide. Again, here is a loon doing that submarine pose. It's a defensive posture. So Gavin mentioned, when a loon is especially nervous, it does this. Most often, especially during nesting season, if you're seeing a loon do this in calm waters, you're probably within 15 to 20 feet of a nest. You need to back off. So this loon is saying, hey, I'm inconspicuous, you don't see me, and you don't see what is very obvious to us is this artificial nesting platform. Next slide. So both loons, the female and the male, take turns taking care of the nest. And so here they're starting to change duties. Next slide. And often we say that loons need to be on a quiet area of a lake. These loons chose an area right by a boat ramp. And loons, they have that specific behavior where they would, if this loon was especially nervous, it would be doing that hangover posture. This loon isn't nervous, and obviously these fishermen don't even see the loon. So there can be some exceptions to the rule, but generally, and even in this situation, please give them plenty of distance. Next slide. So loons will brood loons will brood their chicks. The chicks tend to hatch in the order that the eggs were laid. So usually the female will lay one egg and then a day or two later lay the second egg. And so you can see the first chick is hatched, and this either male or female is waiting for the second chick to hatch. And if the second egg doesn't hatch within a few days, they will leave the nest. It is important for you to leave the egg on the nest. Don't move it, don't take it. Loons are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918. It is illegal for you or anybody, unless they have a special permit, to have loon feathers, to have loon eggs, to have anything loon. So leave that egg in place. Something will come and get the egg. So next slide. So here that loon is still brooding the second egg on the nest, and the chick has left, but they're staying very close. And when the chicks hatch, they stay very close to the shoreline, and they take their chicks to areas just like this where there's a lot of emergent vegetation. And in that vegetation, they find very small prey items for these, very small chicks, things like aquatic invertebrates, so insect larvae, small minnows, crayfish, things like that is what they will feed their small chicks. Next slide. And so as Loon Ranger, it's very important when these chicks hatch, if you don't think you see them, don't give up. I've heard from countless Loon Rangers who say, oh, you know, the chicks hatched and they disappeared, something happened to them, an eagle got them or a predator got them. Not necessarily. So if you take a good look at this picture, there is a chick under that wing. And so the wings will look lumpy. The chicks take advantage of their parents for protection and for warmth and to keep dry too, because they don't have a well-developed oil gland. And so they will spend time under the wings on top of the parents. So do not give up. If you think those chicks have disappeared, they may not have, they may be just hiding under their parents' wings. I've heard from Loon Rangers who like 3 or 4 weeks later say, oh, all of a sudden we have these big fluffy chicks. So don't give up, just keep looking for those chicks under the wings. And usually the chicks will take advantage of their parents like this for about 2 weeks, and then they'll start hanging out in the water more. Next slide. So again, here is another example of a hidden chick. This chick is in the water swimming with his parents, but look how well the chick blends in. So it is really important to have a good pair of binoculars, and if you can, a spotting scope. Now, I don't recommend using a spotting scope unless you have a boat like a pontoon or something where you have a really secure surface to look at the loons with. But probably from shore would be better using a spotting scope. But definitely take your time to observe those loons, because those chicks could be hidden in plain sight. Next slide. So again, this is pretty typical. The chick or chicks will be on the parent's back, and they will the pair will stay together as long as they have the chicks. Next slide. So here's an example of a larger downy chick. This chick is probably, maybe 4 weeks old, 5 weeks old. And parents will communicate with their chicks with hoots and with wails and tremolos. And you'll see different behavior from the chick. So this chick, I would expect, has been told to hide. So this chick is doing its natural behavior of expelling air from its feathers as best it can and being in this submarine pose. So it could be that a predator is close by, or it could be that some of those intruding loons are close by. So they want to hide their chicks and keep them safe from predators and from intruding loons. Next slide. So again, just the same as what Gavin said, when you're filling out the monitoring form, do not leave anything blank. You need to fill in a number. Don't write an A, don't write out 0, don't leave tabs, write out the numeral, and make sure that you have that written out so that we know exactly what you observed. Because otherwise we're going to have to call you to figure it out. Also, don't write a range. Don't write 0 to 5. Write the number that you observed. Next slide. So here, I just sort of wrote out an example of what the monitoring form looks like. So all of you who are part of the annual Lakes monitoring program should have received your monitoring form packet in the mail. And so this should look familiar to you. And so I want you to totally fill out this form as best you can. If you have any questions, you can contact us. But we need your email address, we need your phone number, we need your contact information, not only so that we can get these forms to you, but also if we can ask you questions if we see something that looks interesting or confusing on your monitoring form. We also need to know, as Gavin mentioned, the WBIC number, the Water Body Identification Code. There are more than one Clear or Clearview lake in Wisconsin. So and this is just an example. There is no lake with a WBIC number of all those 5s. But I just wanted to give you an example. But we need you to fill out this information as completely as possible so we know which lake you were monitoring and that we got you the correct that we sent you the correct map in the mail. Next slide. So again, as Gavin mentioned, you can use that website, and I'll just give a few minutes here, dnr.wi.gov/lakes/maps to look up your exact map for the lake that you are monitoring. Okay, next slide. So this is the second page in your monitoring form. So this is more about migration. Some people may be available during migration, and some folks are not. So we may not see you filling this out completely. However, if you have a neighbor that lives on the lake, but you live there seasonally, I recommend that you talk to your neighbors and ask them to be a part of your Loon Ranger team so that you can capture this information. Okay, next slide. So this is probably the most important part of your monitoring form. So this is where you fill in your weekly observations. So this is a log, kind of like a loon diary, so to speak. So on the left side of that is the date. And then you put the number of floaters that you see, the number of territorial pairs, the number of nests with incubating adults, the number of chicks, and then your comments. And I'm very, very interested in your comments. Also, at the end of the monitoring form, we have an entire page of comments. You can also make copies of the log. You can make copies of the comment page so that you can include more information if you need to. So we encourage you to include as much information as you possibly can. So click. Next slide. Okay, so you're going to fill out one row for each time that you observed loons on your lake. So again, fill that out completely. Fill out, on April 15th, maybe you didn't see your territorial pair, but you saw 4 floaters out there. Write 4 in that line for floaters, 0 for territorial pairs, 0 for nests with incubating adults, and 0 for chicks. And that makes it abundantly clear to us what you did see and what you did not see, because that's just as important. Click. Okay, click. So at the end of the season, this becomes a very valuable tool. This will help you fill out the loon season summary accurately. Oftentimes, when we're looking through your monitoring form, if you didn't fill that out accurately, we will use your survey log to fill it out. But we would much rather that you be aware of what's going on your lake and what you put in your survey log and fill it out yourself. So please fill everything out yourself. Next slide. Okay, so this next part of the form is the territory summary. And so we want to know how many territories are on your lake. Maybe you have a small lake and the whole lake is just one territory. Maybe you're on a larger lake that has 2, 3, even more territories than that. For example, the Chippewa flowage had 42 territorial pairs last year. Now, the Chippewa flowage is about 17,000 acres, and there are 12 people who get together and communally help Mark Zich monitor that flowage, that water body. So I also encourage folks to get together to have more than one Loon Ranger on the lake so that you can get as much information as possible. And if you have to be absent, if you have to go away, then those people can help you out. So click. So make sure that, again, that your territory summary reflects what is on your loon log. Click. So you're recording, see at the top part of this form, total territories on lake. I recorded 2 territories, and I called And sometimes you will have descriptions on a map of your lake, and sometimes you're just going to have to come up with your own description of what that territory is. And you're going to have to circle that territory, the area that those loons are defending, approximately on that map. So here I called the territories East Bay and West Bay. So click. So you need to complete each step as it applies to your observation. So I have a couple of examples to show you of how we filled this out. So click. So here is the loon survey log, and you can, if you read through the comments, and I know that this isn't super clear, but our next slide will show it more clearly. On May 15th, we had the first nest on East Bay. And you can see that I filled out East Bay. Did we locate the nest? Yes. On May 22nd, the second nest was on West Bay. Yes. So click. Click again. Can you click again? Okay. So here I have two territories, the East Bay and the West Bay. Okay, now click again. So East Bay had some problems. So as you go through, you want to read through this carefully. Oh no, I did this in the wrong order. Click one more time. Okay, so this green should have been first. So as you're going through, did you locate the nest? Yes. Did you know what kind of nesting site was used? On or near the mainland shore? Did I know if the ownership of the land? You can say unknown, I put public. So this green, did the eggs in the nest fail to hatch? I circled yes. And then I look back on my loon log and I see, oh, there was a territorial dispute and the nest was abandoned on East Bay. So I can also, how was it lost? I know that there was a territorial dispute and that it was lost. Then was there a second nesting attempt? And that's in the blue. So the East Bay pair re-nested in a new location. And I'm able to indicate that on this territory summary. Was there a second nesting attempt? Yes. If yes, did the nest fail to hatch? Yes. Unfortunately, if you look on the second blue circle, a terrible storm yesterday and today, 7 inches of rain. The East Bay nest was washed out. Did the loons nest in the same location? No. Why did they not nest in the same location? Probably because there was a territorial dispute and they nested, and there may be a different male and they nested in a new location. Okay, click. And then click again. Oops, go back, sorry. I didn't circle and then West Bay, the West Bay chick hatched. East Bay is still on the nest. So was I able to locate the nesting site? Yes. Island. And then, and I didn't do this totally correctly, but I would say that did the eggs fail to hatch? No. So for West Bay, the eggs did not fail to hatch. The West Bay chick hatched. So next slide. Okay, so this is the loon season summary. And so I was able to use my loon log to fill out this loon season summary. So I know that there were 2 pairs because we had 2 territories. Both of those pairs had more than 1 nest attempt, but only 1 pair had a successful hatch. So that, remember that East Bay pair didn't hatch, and I can see that on my summary. And did the chick fledge? Yes, it did. Okay, now click again. So you want to make sure, even if you didn't see any loons, we want 0. So if the loons, for instance, didn't have a successful hatch, that would be 0. So 0, if you leave it blank, it doesn't mean 0. It just means no data to us. So we need you to fill that number in. Okay, click. Okay, so next slide. So this is how we used our survey log to fill in the loon survey summary. So click. Okay, click again. So as you can see, there were 2 territorial pairs, and both of them had more than 1 nest attempt. Look over to the right, you can see that the second nest on West Bay, so that column, that second column indicates the territorial pairs. And then territorial pair with more than 1 nest attempt, there were 2. Now click again. Territorial pairs with a successful hatch. Look at your notes. You can see you filled in, so that last column is a chick. So there was a 1 territorial pair with a successful hatch, that West Bay pair. Now click again. How many hatched on this lake? Only 1. And how many survived to 8 weeks? 1 chick survived to 8 weeks. Unfortunately, this doesn't show the date, but you can see the chick hatched on June 18th, and this was actually where the date that I wrote was October 10th. So this chick is more than 8 weeks old. Okay, click. And the number of floaters. So this is really important. That first column is the floater column. And so we want to know the most floaters that you saw at one time. And so if you look at the entirety of the column, on July 21st is when we saw 8 floaters on that lake. Otherwise, there were less than 8. So we do not want a range. We want you to put the most floaters that you saw at one time. So if anyone has any questions about how to fill out that monitoring form or needs help, please contact me. But using your Loon survey log is the key to helping you fill out the majority of your monitoring form. Now click. So here in the comments section, I want you to write things that you think are impacting the loons, or continue on with the comments that you had in your loon survey log. So here I wrote, I'm concerned about future development near the East Bay nesting site. I'm going to contact the new property owners and give them Loonwatch fact sheets and invite them to our Lake Association meeting. So this person is being proactive about trying to help the loons because their nesting site might be threatened by these new owners. And then it says, I am also concerned about our lake's water levels. When would an artificial nesting platform be appropriate? So that would be after 3 years of no nesting due to increased water levels or fluctuating water levels. But this is an appropriate time to ask those questions, and especially to send me an email with those kinds of questions. Why did I have a concern about our lake's increased water levels? Because we had that 7 inches of rain drop all at once. Okay, so click. So again, this is a good time for you to communicate your observations about what might be affecting the loons on your lake. All right, click. So I wanted to go through a series of slides that shows loon chicks from their first day all the way until they are 12 weeks old, or what we consider to be fully fledged or juvenile loon sized. Now, Gavin went through some slides, and you'll see some of the same slides here, from about 2 weeks old to about 6 weeks old. During the loon survey, there's a chance that you could see chicks in those age ranges, because remember, loons could start nesting the beginning of May. So, or typically they start nesting in the middle of May. It takes them about 30 days to incubate, so they could be hatching the beginning to middle of June. So you could expect to see chicks that are anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks old. You might see chicks that are a little bit younger if there are second or even third nesting attempts, which is why we wanted to show you those 2 to 6 week old range. So I want population survey people especially to pay attention to what those chicks look like at the 2 to 6 week old range. This chick is 1 day old. Cute, beautiful, fluffy, adorable little chick. And as we go through these slides, I want you to pay particular attention to the length of the bill and the length of the body, and then the head, everything will be getting bigger, but that's pretty distinctive. So next slide. Here's a 2-day-old chick. Even after just a day, boy, that chick has grown. If you are keenly observing loon parents with their loon chicks, the parents are entirely focused on feeding those chicks. They stuff them until they're full. And sometimes the chicks will even refuse food because they've had too much or because a prey item might be too large. So 2-day-old chick, it's already grown quite a bit. Next slide. Here's a pair, 4-day-old chicks. Next slide. 7-day-old chicks. Now look at how that bill has really lengthened and thickened, the eyes, the head, the body. Okay, next slide. A 10-day-old chick. And like I said, the loon parents typically tolerate the loons on their back until they get up to about 2 weeks old. So next slide. So here's a beautiful, fluffy 2-week-old chick. So all these chicks that I've shown up until this point, they're all completely dependent on their parents for food, for warmth, and for protection. And so next slide. So this is a 3-week-old chick. You can see, so that 2-week-old to 6-week-old, this is what you might be seeing in the population survey. So pay close attention. So this 3-week-old chick is just starting to molt into some of its adult contour feathers. Next slide. And here's the 5-week-old chick. As Gavin was mentioning, this is a fun time to be observing the interactions between the parents and the chicks, because the parents will be helping the chicks learn how to hunt by dropping half-dead prey items in front of them, and the chicks will have to chase them to be able to obtain their meal. So next slide. Here's a 6-week-old chick. So they're really losing their downy baby feathers and getting those contour and flight feathers in at this stage at 6 weeks old. Next slide. Here's 7 weeks old. It just has a little bit of down toward its tail and on its head, sort of tufted on its head. Next slide. So here's a 2-month-old chick, which is an 8-week-old chick. Now this chick is really starting to look more like an adult-sized loon. It has lost all of its downy feathers. Its flight feathers are growing in, and it has its adult contour feathers. And it'll start, you'll start seeing it to sort of ruffle its wings and exercise those wings in an effort to get ready to fly. And by this time, it should be starting to get pretty independent from its parents and be able to feed on its own. Next slide. So here is a 12-week-old chick. So this is a beautiful juvenile chick, so 3 months old. A lot of times I will hear from Loon Rangers that they're concerned about their chicks, because at this stage the parents are probably trying to leave it alone, but the chicks will still sometimes chase their parents around if they see a free meal in their parents' mouth. If they see a fish, they'll still chase their parents around. So typically when we start to experience migration, the floaters, the loons that didn't have chicks, that didn't have families, those are the loons that tend to migrate first. So you'll start to see loons congregating in August and September, and those floaters will be migrating down to the Gulf of Mexico first. The next series of loons to leave our northern lakes here are the parents to the chicks. And this is when people tend to get pretty upset. And in September, October, they'll start calling me and saying, oh no, the parents left the babies. What is going to happen to our beautiful baby chicks? These chicks are hardwired for migration. There is no problem. These parents can leave the chicks. You'll hear them, sometimes they'll be tremoloing and they'll be upset that their parents left. They are fine. They can take care of themselves. They are very adept at being able to fish and swim and take care of themselves. So that ends this series of slides. So I hope that you, if you have any questions, if you want to see these again, please let me know. I'm going to attempt to get these onto our website too, so that you can see the different stages of chick growth. Okay, so we're going to go on to look at adults and the differences that we see throughout the season. So this is a beautiful newly molted adult common loon. And so I want you to take a moment to look at the black and white feathers, especially the white, because that is going to change as we go through the season. Those feathers are going to get worn. And I think that this is just, you know, it's not necessarily important to record this, but I think it's an interesting thing to be able to observe throughout the season. So next slide. So here's the summer birds. Like this is in the middle of the summer, and you can see that those white feathers, some of them on the back are starting to split a little bit. So you can see some of that wear starting to show up. Next slide. Here's late summer. So you can really see that those white feathers, and this would be true on the black part too, that's just not as apparent. Those feathers are starting to wear, they're starting to split apart. Next slide. So here's early fall. So you can see that the loons are beginning to molt. They start to molt on their face first, kind of like a lab. As they get older, they get gray on their face. Well, as loons start to get close to migration, you'll see them molting on their face first. And those feathers on the back are really, really getting to be quite damaged. Next slide. And worn out. Here's mid-fall. So some people will call me and say, oh, I think that the loon is sick, you know, something's wrong with the loon. No, this loon is molting. They're almost unrecognizable to us by the time they get down to the Gulf of Mexico. So next slide. This is late fall. So this is really, aside from some of those spots, this is typically what loons look like when they get down to the Gulf of Mexico. They lose their red eye, they lose their spots, they have this brownish gray plumage, and they keep that until they start to migrate back north. And they start to change plumage usually around the beginning of March. And I was lucky enough to see this. I was one of the few people that traveled, that was able to travel early this March, before COVID got just out of control. And I saw this down in South Carolina. And it's an amazing sight to see these loons as they're molting into their breeding plumage. But this is what it looks like as they're molting out of their breeding plumage. And this is, I think, pretty much why we haven't seen a movie made about loons, because this is what they look like. And they lose all their, you know, really charismatic behaviors too. They're no longer defending nests. They're no longer raising chicks when they're down in the Gulf of Mexico. They're just trying to feed themselves and take care of themselves until they have to return. And so there are no yodels. You might hear, on the way back, you might hear a little bit of yodeling. But down there, they may be wailing, they may a little tremolo here, and a lot of hooting. And then they tend to be quite dispersed when they're down there as well, until they start to get gathered up again to migrate north. So the end of the presentation, next slide. So click again, and then click again. And then one more click. So this is a quote from one of the coordinators from the early 1990s. Some of you may know her, Terry Dalton. And I just love this quote because it really, in effect, talks about the incredible job that Loon Rangers do. The intensive nurturing, observation, and protection provided to loons by volunteers across the continent is unprecedented. What Loon Rangers are protecting is not just loons, but a whole aesthetic. The loon, the forested shores, and the clear cold water. Because if you want to protect loons, you have to protect everything that is surrounding loons. So I thank you. My job would not exist without folks like you. And I will be happy to take some questions now.
Thank you, Erica. We're all applauding in our homes and spaces. You just can't hear us.
Well, good. So are there, oh, I see a bunch of chat questions.
We do. We had a lot of questions about nesting platforms, but I'm going to try to scroll to the top here and see. Someone had a question about 130 about surveying the same lakes over and over again to confirm the presence or lack of loons.
So for the population survey, is that what they're referring to?
I think so, yeah. They wanted to include, like, would that actually show growth on a new small lake?
Sure, because these are representative of all lakes in Wisconsin. So these lakes were chosen back in 1985. They are all different size classes. They are all different types of lakes. So like seepage lakes, drainage lakes, flowages, spring-fed lakes. They're all different types of lakes, and they're also in the densities that reflect the number of lakes in the counties. So because these are representative, they should reflect what's happening out there on all the lakes in northern Wisconsin. And we need to do the same lakes over and over again because that makes it statistically valid. If we did different lakes every time, we wouldn't know what was happening. We wouldn't have this representative sample. I hope that that answers their question.
Yes, thank you. And chime in if that doesn't answer your question in the chat, and we'll address it further if Erica or Gavin can. Erica, another question, which I'm pretty sure you answered, approximate dates of loon egg hatching?
So it depends on when they were laid, approximately 26 to 30 days after they were laid. So typically in northern Wisconsin, we'll see them laying their eggs around mid-May. Could be the beginning of May. But again, if they have to re-nest for any of the number of reasons that I said, it could be later than that. So, but 26 to 30 days after they initially lay their eggs.
Someone said great presentation, Erica. Make sure you guys see that.
Thanks.
Let's see, is it too late? Is there a way that people can find out if are you still looking for people to participate in the loon population study? I guess would be the better way.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So you go to our website. On the right-hand part of our website, there's sort of a drop-down list and it says get involved. And then you'll see a screen and then you'll be able to click on Wisconsin Loon Population Survey and you will be able to register. So there's a list of lakes on that page. You click on the map and you will see that list of lakes. You'll also see exactly where the lake is, and then you can choose the lake and sign up there. And you will hear from Gavin.
Perfect. Some folks shared their observations of loons already from last weekend. That's awesome.
Oh, can we read that?
Yeah, it's so the person is iPad, so their name didn't come through, but it said, last Sunday I observed a loon on Auburn Lake in Fond du Lac County and a loon on Erler Lake in Washington County.
Cool. So they're here. Yay.
We had, like I said, a lot of questions about nesting platforms, and I feel like you addressed quite a few of them. Is a permit issued by the DNR required to place an artificial nesting platform?
So you go to our webpage and we have a link to the DNR page that helps you figure out whether or not your lake is considered an area of special natural resource concern. If it is, you need a permit. If it isn't, you don't. But no matter what, please confer with the DNR so that they know what you're doing out there and so that they can provide their expertise. It's always good to have a good relationship with the DNR. And they want to help you. You know, they want to make sure that our loons are doing well here in the state as well.
For nesting platforms, and I apologize, I'd say everyone on this meeting but me is probably more knowledgeable about nesting platforms. One of the questions is about putting a platform on a natural shoreline as opposed to a floating platform.
So, so one of the things that we recommend instead of a platform is if you're seeing eagles predate your nest on the land area of land where they're nesting, you can put up eagle guards. And so that would be like a dowel, 4 dowels equidistant, about 4 feet equidistant around the nest. And then you hang like a nylon rope. You drill a hole in the top of the dowel, you hang a nylon rope. And because it's 4 feet apart, eagles have that wing spread of 6 feet. Because it's 4 feet apart, the eagles will not be able to land on the nest and get the eggs. But I would not put a platform on land. That's that the platforms are really meant to be floating islands.
Has there been research done on how much undisturbed shoreline is needed to give loons security and the space to nest? That was a question from GJE.
Oh, there has. So Mike Meyer, who is retired now from Wisconsin DNR, he just did a ton of research on loons. His specialty, he was a toxicologist, so he did a lot of research on the effects of mercury on loons, but he did look at habitat. And I don't have these figures in front of me, but I believe that that if a shoreline is developed to the point where you have one house for every 100 feet of shoreline, that is too much development for loons, and they won't nest there. They may, if there's not a ton of recreation, and if the water quality is decent, they may exist there. You may see some floaters there, but you will not see nesting loons. So they need pretty undeveloped shoreline to be able to nest. I'm sorry, I don't have those figures right in front of me.
No problem. I will share with you the list of folks who signed up for the workshop. So if there is any further information that you'd like to send, we can.
Sure, I can actually send that publication.
And GJE also asked when everyone could get a copy of the Loon Week poster this year.
Oh, this is what breaks my heart about COVID-19. So Loonwatch is a program at Northland College. We're a small college, and right now only essential employees are allowed on campus. And I fortunately am allowed to work from home, but I am not allowed on campus. And so I'm not able to send posters out until we're able to get back to campus. And I don't have a solution for that at this point in time. But at some point we will. And it's a great poster too. It's I don't know if you all saw it was in the news a lot earlier this summer. There was a loon pair that raised a mallard duck chick, which was absolutely bizarre and remarkable and cool, and I don't have enough words to describe it. But one of the persons who worked for Walter Piper, Linda Grenzer, she's an incredible photographer, and she captured a photo of the duck chick on the back of the loon pair. So we will eventually hopefully be able to get that poster out and distributed.
James Zock actually asked about that duckling. Do you know what became of the duckling that was adopted?
So the story is on the back of the poster, but no, Walter just decided that this was too precious of a relationship to disturb by trying to ban the duckling and the loons. So they did eventually leave. I don't have that information right in front of me, but I believe it was in October that they all eventually did leave the lake. We don't know what happened to that duckling. The thing that does seem worrisome to us is that duckling now seems to associate loons as its parent and as kind of who it is. So if it approaches other loons next year that are territorial, it could be in trouble if it approaches loons in general. They're probably not going to understand what's going on. So it would have been fascinating to be able to watch this exact duckling, but we don't know. And so let your imagination take you to places unknown with this incredible duckling.
Erica, is there a way, should folks just email you at Loonwatch at that email on the screen if they're curious whether or not there is a Loon Ranger for their lake?
Yes, yep. We have databases for both the population survey and for the annual lakes monitoring program.
Excellent. So contact Erica if you're not sure if someone is watching out and surveying the loons on your water body. I know a few people asked that.
Mm-hmm.
Erica, you mentioned, you know, we're all facing all sorts of interesting challenges with the COVID-19 situation right now. So hopefully everyone will get a poster before December. But are there other, do you have any other advice for volunteers during this time?
This is challenging, and it's challenging for me as sort of the leader of this group. Right now, because of COVID-19, I want everyone to take care of themselves. The loons can wait. There have been very strong recommendations by our northern counties here that if you have seasonal homes and if you are kind of a tourist and just coming up here, that you stay away until things are back to normal. And the reasons are myriad, but I actually looked some information up that I thought was kind of interesting and scary. And the reason that they're asking you to stay back is because there really is not the capacity for hospital beds and for care for a lot of people, for all the seasonal people who do come up here. It increases our population in some places more than tenfold. And so in Hayward, for example, we have a resident population of 2,318 people. They have a hospital in Hayward. A lot of these small communities, if they have a clinic, they're lucky. You sometimes have to travel quite a ways to get medical care. The hospital in Hayward has 25 beds and 3 ER doctors. That's it. In Ashland, there's a population of 8,209 people. They have 35 hospital beds and 7 ER doctors. Rhinelander has a population of 7,563 people. They have 63 hospital beds, but they have 7 ER doctors. So right now is not the time to come north. Unfortunately, this could really have an impact on this program. We're going to be really watching, obviously, as everyone is, what's happening with COVID-19 closely, but please take care of yourselves. Loons can wait. If you live up here, boy, enjoy the loons and try and get all this COVID-19 out of your head for even just a few moments as you're watching the loons come back. But I would we may have to make some difficult decisions in the future, but I'm not going to say anything right now because I want you to have enjoyed this presentation and be thinking good thoughts about loons right now.
Understandable. So the folks who already live in Wisconsin and northern part of the state, they're okay to continue sampling?
Yes, I would say so. I mean, just follow the guidelines, the social distancing. If ever you don't feel safe, if there are a lot of people out in the lake, stay at home. But yeah, I think it would certainly be safe, especially in the annual lakes program, to continue to do your monitoring, and may just be a really good respite from everything that's happening.
Definitely. We have a question from Mary's iPad, and it might make more sense to you. She wondered if let me just read. So if you're participating in the population survey, will you receive a reminder about what lakes you signed up for? And Will there be an opportunity to spend time with the loon researcher in South Carolina in 2021?
We sent out an email, and we will be, unfortunately, because of COVID-19, we will be sending out emails with the survey form, the survey instructions, and your lake map. So that's probably how you're going to be getting that information. When you get that email with those things, I recommend that you print that out right away as a reminder. And yes, they are going to be doing the research in South Carolina in 2021. I believe they have the dates set for pretty similar for the beginning of March. I think this year it was the last week of February and the first week of March. Next year it's going to be the first 2 weeks of March, and I can get you information and connect you with Brooks Wade and the folks down there too, if you just shoot me an email. All right, have we addressed everyone's question? Or
I think we have gone through all of the questions. Please go ahead and submit it if you have another one. I do have one. Will the electronic presentation be available online for future reference? I can answer that question. We will be archiving the presentations. Michelle's been recording this session for us, and so that will be available on our convention archives that will start populating next week. And so it will be available for you and other people to view and learn from.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
That's super helpful. I may be steering people toward
yeah.
your
We'll all have time to check out all the presentations that we have to miss, so it'll be good.
Yeah.
Let's see, and now we have another question about the loon sounds. Is there a place to download the sounds that Gavin shared earlier? Terry would like to share them at the annual lake meeting they have.
Mm-hmm. If you go to our website, you should be able to download them. If you're unable to do that, just shoot me an email and I can email you those sound files.
So pretty much when in doubt about anything, email Erica and she'll help orient you to what you need.
I may be in trouble, but yes.
We'll all be working together to figure this out. Let's see, would we be able to? iPad is asking, would we be able to use this format in the future if we live too far from the location of the presentation?
Yes, I'm learning a lot. This is the first online presentation I've done, and we're planning to do some more in May, especially to fulfill Gavin's internship, and because I'm curious how the platform that we have, we're not using Zoom, we're using something called GoToMeeting. So we're going to schedule some more in May, and we're going to put some recorded presentations out there, and then of course I'll steer you toward this presentation as well. But I like that we're able to at least interact. It is so strange for me not to have an audience to be able to respond to, your facial expressions. But I appreciate your questions and please keep them coming.
Agreed. We have some more comments about what a wonderful presentation, how informative this was.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad that this format is working for everyone here in the workshop. It's like Erica said, it's not the ideal, but it's a great resiliency. It's a great way for us to figure out how to make things work. So.
And I want to thank you guys for doing this. I mean, to put this together so quickly in an online format was remarkable. It was a remarkable feat, and then your attention to those of us who really like to be consulted and make sure that our sound files work and everything. It was great to work with you. So thank you for doing this. What a great opportunity for everyone.
Oh, you're very welcome, and don't be impressed yet. We haven't pulled off the whole online learning event, so let's see.
Well, you're doing good so far.